Hey, yo, government! Can I have my fucking life back? I can barely afford Christmas this year. I'm making the most money per hour I've ever made since starting my career. And thanks to corporate greed and the highest cost of living that anybody's ever seen. And the bullshit taxation! I'm broker than I've ever been. I don't pay for luxuries. I get generic everything. Generic laundry soap, generic body wash, generic food. And now I almost can't even afford generic anything. People are saying that taxation is a scam. It's not a scam, it's extortion.
The biggest lie that we were all told is that if you just work hard, everything's gonna work out. You go to work every day and you work your ass off and you make sure your employer knows that you're valuable where you're at, you will get promoted, you will get a raise. The fact of the matter is, in every job I've ever worked, basically ever, the only thing hard work gets you is taken advantage of. If you're in the corporate world and you're working your ass off to do as much work as you can, you're gonna get paid the same amount as the guy next to you that's doing half the job you're doing. At the end of the day, really, the harder you work at your job, the less money you make. I've worked warehouse jobs where somebody became so good at their job that they were never able to get promoted because they just could not afford to lose that person's labor on the floor. Meanwhile, the people that were way worse than him at his job would get the promotion. Because at the end of the day, when that guy that's super valuable on the floor gets promoted and is no longer working there, they have to fill like 3 positions to replace that guy. But if they promote the guy that's actually not all that great, but he's just semi-capable at his job, they'd rather promote that guy because at least they don't have to cover 3 separate positions when he leaves. So the whole work hard mantra at your job, for 99.9% of jobs in this country, that's just not the case. The real answer is you need to work hard in the right places. Work hard on yourself. Work hard on the things you want to do.
This story right here is why something has to change. Capitalism is collapsing in front of our very eyes. Look at this. Despite working 40 hours a week, this American cannot afford to live and feed her newborn baby. She says, "I'm just so tired of living and working, doing this every single day and having nothing. I don't know how I'm going to get childcare when I have to work 40 hours a week because I can't even afford to feed my family as it is. I'm having medical problems. I can't even get into the doctor because x-rays and MRIs are $500, let alone a colonoscopy and anoscopy that I need. Like, I can't afford anything. My doctors cancel my appointments. This world is just not meant to be like this. We need to make change for us, for each other, please." And she's absolutely right, but what are our leaders doing right now that we elected? They're giving tax cuts to billionaires while people like her are working full-time and still struggling. People are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and they still can't afford health care, rent, childcare, or groceries. And instead of fixing the problem like Donald Trump promised he would do, he is making everything worse. He slaps tariffs on goods that are raising the cost of food, clothes, and everyday essentials across the entire United States. He also passed the big beautiful bill which is raising costs for American families, slashing social programs, raising our debt ceiling, and giving tax cuts to billionaires. Trump promised to make everything cheaper for us. He promised to help the middle class. But of course, what does the billionaire do? He helps other billionaires.
Hello and what's up, good people? What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing great from wherever you're watching this video from, and welcome back for another video. Now, let's debunk some propaganda. For everything you've been told about the American dream, especially, work hard, play by the rules, and you will succeed. That is the myth of meritocracy, and right now it's crumbling in front of our eyes. Across America, many people are struggling. Jobs are disappearing, businesses are collapsing, wages are frozen, rent is skyrocketing, prices are becoming unbearable, and people are lining up for food, sleeping in their cars, showering at the gym. All of this, especially during a season that's supposed to be that one of abundance and celebration, especially, the Christmas season, the end of year season in America is a big deal. And really, I think what is striking is many of the loudest voices talking about this, complaining about the harsh reality of the current economic situation in America are white people, white Americans, people who really traditionally believe that the system was fair, or maybe fair to them, but suddenly working hard is not enough. I think they're realizing that. And the truth is, Black people, they have always known this for generations, that survival has always been about more than just working hard. It's more than just effort. It's about resilience, about strategy, and understanding that the system was never actually designed to reward hard work. Now, that is what I want to talk about in this video, but I want to roll this clip by one scholar, Tim Wise, and I'll be back with a good commentary. See you on the other side.
I'm trying to say to you is if we ever want to really tackle racism, classism, and sexism, we're going to have to interrogate the most fundamental beliefs of our country. The idea of meritocracy, rugged individualism, right? Because ultimately those kinds of beliefs leave us unable, incapable of actually interrogating our world and understanding what's happening currently within it. And let me tell you why that's dangerous, right? See, here's the thing. It's very ironic, right, that mentality doesn't just hurt people of color, it actually hurts white folks. And this is what I want to conclude with because I want you to get this point. It's the most important point, perhaps. That's why I want to close with it. It's one thing to say that people of color are hurt by the system. That's obvious. And I could give you hours and hours of examples. I've already given you a few. But I want to suggest that not knowing the past, being ignorant about the history and how it brought us to this point is actually dangerous for whites as well. Why? Well, think about it. If you are told that wherever you end up is all about your own effort, at least if you're a person of color, you sort of know that's bullshit, right? Like people of color who know anything about their history know that it's way more complicated than that, right? They know that they've had people in their family that have been working hard for generations, don't have anything to show for it. Right? People of color know they did some of the hardest work and continue to do some of the hardest work in this country every day and are not rewarded commensurate with the value that they create and produce. So people of color generally don't buy the myth, but white America has had the luxury of believing it. Even working class white people historically have been able to believe that, well, as long as I work hard, my kids will be better off than me. And their kids will be better off than them. And their kids will be better off. In other words, white folks have been able to take the idea of mobility for granted. Right? At least horizontal mobility, right? So the guy says, well, my granddaddy worked in the mine, my daddy worked in the mine, I'm working in the mine, my kid's gonna work in the mine. That's an expectation, isn't it? It's actually a sense of entitlement. By God, as long as we work hard, we'll always have stuff. People of color have never had the luxury of believing that. Black and brown folks have never been able to say, as long as I work hard, I'm sure I'll always have employment. Right? But white Americans have been able to believe it. Now, why is that dangerous? It's dangerous because what happens if I come to believe that wherever I end up is all about me, and I've had the luxury of buying into that mythology because I'm a member of the dominant group that created the mythology, right? And I think that history flatters me because I wrote it, going back to what Baldwin said, and then all of a sudden the economy shifts and those jobs disappear, which is what's happening. What if all of a sudden some of those jobs become superfluous and anachronistic? What happens if those assembly line jobs are moving to other countries because it's cheaper to do the work there? What happens if the guy that owns the coal mine discovers that it's cheaper to just blow the top off the mountain with dynamite to get the coal and not have to use as many coal miners, right? And then all of a sudden the coal jobs are going away because it's cheaper to get the coal in other ways than what you used to do. Now, if I'm a white guy that's always placed an emphasis on my own merit as the determiner of where I end up, and I'm struggling suddenly, if I've believed all my life that wherever I end up is all about me, and now I'm out of work for 26 weeks, 52 weeks, 99 weeks, as some were during the height of the recession a few years back, what do I do? Because now I'm internalizing shame, am I not? I'm internalizing blame because there's a voice in the back of my head that says, well, it's all your fault, remember, because wherever you end up is all about you. So if you're at the bottom, there must be something wrong with you. So what do I do with that shame and that pain? I have to deflect it, don't I? Otherwise, it's going to eat me alive. It's either going to eat me alive or I got to put it on you, right? So now a politician comes along and says, I can take away your pain. Oh no, the pain that you're feeling, that's not your fault. When those black folks are out of work and when those Latino folks are out of work, that's their fault. That's because they're lazy. When you're out of work, it's also their fault. It's not about you, it's about them. So you go, oh good, and then you fall for it, right? But it doesn't really solve your problem to start scapegoating them. You're still dealing with that little voice in the back of your head, and then what happens? Well, think about this story you've all heard about, and I want to suggest this is deeply connected to whiteness and white supremacy and the system and history of white privilege. You've heard about the opioid crisis, right? All these white folks in small town America getting hooked on heroin. They started off with Oxy, right, because they got a prescription for some pain from a doctor, and then they got addicted. Now they're doing street heroin, right? And without all this sympathy, by the way, right? We're talking about, oh, the opioid crisis. We got to help these poor salt of the earth white people who were hooked on dope. My God. We got to help them, right? We got to have rehab and treatment. We didn't do that in the 70s when we had a heroin crisis in black and brown poor communities. We just called people junkies and locked them up. We didn't do that in the 80s with crack. We didn't talk about rehab and treatment. We talked about prison, right? But with these white folks, we got all this sympathy. Well, good, it's about time, we should. But here's the problem. Why do you think the opioid crisis is happening to these folks? There was by the way, you may not have heard this, the biggest single correlated factor with support for Donald Trump in the election in a community by community sense was the number of people addicted to opiates in those communities. There was a one-to-one linear relationship between the degree of opiate addiction and the support levels for Donald Trump. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that you had to be high to vote for Donald Trump. That's not what I'm saying. That's not my argument, though it's a fascinating hypothesis that some scholars in the room might want to study. That's not my argument. My argument is that what was Donald Trump? He was basically a human opiate, right? He was an opiate in human form. He walks into the room and says, I can take away your pain, right? By showing you who's to blame for it. What is an opiate? An opiate is pharmacologically meant to do just one thing, block pain receptors. Right? That's all it does. It blocks pain receptors. And here's a guy that comes along and says, I can block your pain receptivity by blaming these folks and letting you scapegoat them. The problem is opiates and Donald Trump as a human one don't actually solve the problem, right? If you got a crushed disc in your back and they put you on opiates to kill the pain, that's not going to fix your back. It's just going to get you through the really bad moments. If you have cancer and they put you on morphine or something to deal with the pain or some opiate to deal with the pain, that doesn't cure your cancer. It just gets you through the worst moments of it. Right? The same is true with all the supposed solutions that this president is pushing as a form of political opioid, right? But why are these folks doing it? Think about it for a second. There's a study that came out 2 years ago from Princeton, and it found a really interesting fact. From 1999 to 2013, there was this huge spike in death rates among one group of Americans only, and that was white, middle-aged, non-college educated working class people. Middle-aged, non-college educated, working-class whites saw this huge increase in death rates, 200,000 additional deaths compared to what we would have expected, because normally in an industrial economy like ours, the death rates are always going down because, the place is getting healthier and usually wealthier, and unless there's a famine or a natural disaster, the rates are normally going in a good direction. And they continued to do that for black folks. They continued to do that for Latinx folks. They continued to do that for Asian Americans. They continued to do that for wealthy whites, and even whites that weren't necessarily wealthy but had a college degree and some sense of hope for the future. It was just this one group that saw this seemingly inexplicable rise. And when that happened, there was a really interesting reaction. There's a conservative columnist for the New York Times who wrote about it and said, so much for white privilege. Look at these white people. They're dying. How can you say white people have privilege and advantage? They're the ones dying. And by the way, they were dying from opioid overdoses, heavy drinking, and suicide. That was the three main contributors to that death spiral, right? So how can you say there's privilege? These folks are killing themselves. Right? But actually, I think that was proof of a system of privilege, but a proof of a system of privilege that had finally started to let them down and they didn't know what to do with it, right? Because if I tell you all of your life that all you got to do is work hard and you'll make it, and suddenly you're not, and you have expectations that are up here, but the fulfillment is only about right here, what are you going to do? You don't know what to do with that pain. On the other hand, if I'm a person of color, I always knew that to get up here, I was going to have to hustle and grind. Right? That I always knew getting to a 7 or better on the 1 to 10 scale was going to take a hell of a lot of work. So if I'm a person of color and I'm already at a 5.5, I might be like, well, all right then. Things are looking up. But if I'm white and you told me I was going to have an 8 or a 9 or a 10, if I just worked hard and did everything and played by the rules, and now I'm only at a 5.5, oh, hell no. 5.5 wasn't meant for me. That was meant for those people. Now I can't handle it. So I either got to take it out on you or I take it out on myself. What I'm trying to say is that a system of inequality, which usually has worked for white people, has set us up and created a mentality of expectation and entitlement that can't always be fulfilled, right? A couple years back during the recession, Newsweek did a cover story about all these executives who'd lost their jobs, because it didn't just hit working class folks. A lot of middle management and even executives were getting laid off. They had this story about this white guy, right? He was interviewed, and he's talking about how he lost his job as the chief financial officer at some company. And he said, whenever I'm out there looking for work, I feel so ashamed, right? And he said, I feel like there's a big sign hanging around my neck, a neon sign that says, unemployed bum. I remember reading that and thinking, man, who told you that unemployed people were bums? I know who didn't tell you that. Unemployed people. I know who else didn't tell you that. Any person of color didn't tell you that. You know who told you that unemployed people were bums? You told you that unemployed people were bums. That's the irony of this system. The irony of this system is that it sets us all up to believe that certain outcomes are going to happen. And if you're white, you've had the luxury of believing them. And then when they don't, the level of frustration, frustrated expectations creates this kind of self-hatred that you take out on yourself, or hatred of others that you take out on them. But none of it solves the problem, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that inequality has a downside, not just for the people on the bottom, but even for some of the folks up here. Because the minute that it can't be sustained anymore, the minute that that system falls apart, and things do change, you know, the world is always changing. And if you're not ready for change, you're not ready for change. James Baldwin also said something about that. He was talking about how people of color sometimes, how black folks in particular, about whom he was writing, are the most prepared for crisis. And sometimes white folks are the least prepared. This is what he said. In this case, he was speaking about black folks. He said, "That man who has to snatch his humanity every day out of the fires of human cruelty that rage to destroy it, learns something about himself in the process that no school and no church can teach. He gains a sense of his own authority, and that is unshakable, because in order to save his life, he has to learn to read the meaning behind the words, to read between the lines, to take nothing for granted." And Baldwin concludes by saying, when you are constantly having to survive the worst that life can bring, you cease to be afraid of what life can bring. The flip side of that is that when you haven't had to survive the worst that life can bring because you've been the favored group, and suddenly the worst that life can bring is staring you in the face, you have no idea how to cope with it. I guess my point is that white America should have been listening to black and brown folks a long damn time ago. And maybe if we had listened to their experiences and learned from their experiences, we wouldn't be having the existential meltdown that so many millions are, that would allow them to vote for a walking, talking, breathing human opiate, right? And we better figure this out. We don't have a lot of time. In 2042, if not earlier, right, half the country is going to be people of color and half are going to be white. That's a fact. No wall's going to stop that. Right? Half the country is going to be people of color, half are going to be white. How are we going to survive if half of the country, the people of color have, is still twice as likely to be unemployed? How are we going to survive if the people of color half is still 3 times as likely to be poor? How are we going to survive if the people of color half still has 1/15 the net worth? Answer, we're not going to survive. Right? So this thing about racial justice, this thing about equity, this ain't charity work. Right? This is radical self-help. This is about saving ourselves and the country that we claim to love. It is about, and I beg to remind you, not making America great again, but making America great for the very first and only time. Thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it.
When I see the Make America Great Again, my comment is, do you accept that that could possibly be construed as a racist remark? When was it ever great in America for the African American?
So Bryan Cranston has stirred up a lot of controversy recently on the internet with an interview highlighting something that a lot of places have studied for some time, talking about how the phrase "Make America Great Again" and other phrases similar tend to highlight the lack of empathy we're always seeing from the right, and their overall consistent inability to step outside of their own experience and acknowledge others. Because at its core, that is what empathy is, the ability to share someone else's feelings or experience by imagining what it would be like to be in that person's situation. Which is kind of the main reason I always say, I have some friends and acquaintances that are kind of on the right, but I would never date someone on the right, because someone who has a lot of empathy is important to me in dating, and cue all of the crying boys who totally don't care in my comments. The phrase itself, "Make America Great Again," perfectly embodies their utter lack of empathy. Because it brings up the great question that they can never seem to answer is, when was America great for absolutely everybody and not just straight white men, is the catch. I mean, African Americans weren't even technically freed until 1869. And they couldn't really all even vote, and not even voting safely at this point, till 1870. And they're still fighting being able to vote safely and easily to this day. The Civil Rights Act wasn't passed until 1964, not that long ago. Married women weren't even allowed to own their own property or keep their own working wages until 1848. We definitely couldn't even vote until 1920. Even though technically we were supposed to be able to have our own bank accounts in the 60s, many banks would still not allow them to be signed off without a husband. And without a husband, we weren't allowed to own credit cards until 1974. Which is wild when you consider that's close to 10 years off from when my oldest sibling was born. And many of us weren't even allowed to be married legally everywhere until 2015, and they're still fighting that constantly to this day. When you say the phrase "make America great again," who does that include? Because it excludes all women, all people of color, LGBTQ communities. Do you want to do the math on who's left in that equation? Yeah, it's people who have no ability to see outside of their lived experience and understand that America wasn't really ever that amazing for the rest of us.
After seeing Trump's cabinet picks, I don't want to hear the words DEI or merit coming out of the mouth of a white conservative ever again. If the resumes of his nominees belong to black or brown people, y'all would throw a fit. When white people are mediocre and unqualified, it's brushed off. They don't question their competency because whiteness is automatically assumed to mean capability. Meanwhile, a black person could have an impeccable resume, 20 years of experience, and 3 PhDs from Yale, and you're still going to hear a DEI hire come out of someone's mouth. It's all rooted in the idea that black people are inherently inferior. If you cannot wrap your mind around the possibility that a black person could actually just be smarter than you or more talented than you, you're literally a white supremacist. Sorry. The world is full of mediocre white people who skate by without anyone ever questioning their competency. And when their mediocrity is brought up, it's never associated with the color of their skin, as it shouldn't be. We would just like the same courtesy. So next time someone tries to use DEI as a slur, just remind them of Trump's cabinet picks. If unqualified white people can hold some of the highest offices in the land, trust me, you deserve to be in the rooms that you're in.
All right, so Team Wise hits the nail on the head. The myth of meritocracy only works when the system is protecting you. And, the moment that protection by the system, the safety nets, disappear, the illusion simply, shatters. And that's exactly what we are seeing. Donald Trump exposing the system. Millions of Americans are doing everything right as per the rules. They work long hours, they go to school, they pay their taxes, but still they're not being able to, they can't afford rent, they can't afford basic health care, even basic necessities. Some are working 2 or even 3 jobs and still struggling, still lining up for food donations. And suddenly the idea that hard work equals success is exposed as the lie it always has been. And here is the kicker though. Black Americans have understood this for far too long. Hard work alone has never guaranteed anything in this capitalistic system that America is based upon. History, slavery and segregation, redlining, wage theft and discrimination has taught black people, a lot about that, survival requires more than just effort. You need strategy, you need community, but most importantly, you need resilience. No wonder you're not seeing so many black people complaining as such. Now, white Americans, and particularly those that supported this government, those that elected Donald Trump, believe that those that believed in the American dream are the ones that are learning and realizing this lesson the hard way. Trump didn't create this crisis though. He just exposed the truth. The system has never been fair, and meritocracy is just a story to justify, inequality, and that is the plain truth. And this moment isn't just economic alone. You look at it deeply, it is cultural, it is also psychological. Many are waking up to the fact that the so-called rules they trusted were never meant to save them. Meanwhile, black communities have always been ready or been preparing for this kind of crisis, this kind of reality. They have been living in this kind of reality for generations. So resilience to them isn't new. Resilience for black people is survival. So, in short, working hard is not enough. It never was to start with. The system rewards power, connections, the color of your skin has been the safety net. But suddenly, that is disappearing. being white alone and working and going to job every day is just not enough anymore, because the system was never meant to just reward effort on its own. And if you think meritocracy is real, just working hard and everything should be okay, just look at the people, standing in line for food while having a full-time job, or even going 2-3 jobs. You will know that working hard in this system is not sufficient. Trump didn't break the American dream. He revealed it for what it truly is, just a marketing slogan, a system designed to protect a few while convincing the rest to believe in the lie. So the American dream is being exposed to be a big fat lie. And now those that believed in the lie are those that are going to be hit hard by this truth. So we've come to the end of this video. I believe you might have learned something from it. Do share with me what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.